This is Father Patrick Briscoe.
And this is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all who support us. If you enjoy our podcast, please consider making a monthly donation to us on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Friends, we are so excited to welcome to this special guest splaining episode the very talented Australian journalist Tess Livingstone. Tess, welcome to Godsplaining.
Thank you very much, Father Patrick. It's great to be with you.
We're so excited to have you on because, not just because you're an incredibly accomplished journalist, that would be a reason enough to have you on the show, but because of your recent projects. So for those of you who don't know who Tess is a veteran Australian journalist who's written on politics, economics, strategic policy, the culture wars. I mean, you name it, and Tess has talked about it somewhere. She's written editorials for The Australian, for The Weekend Australian since 2007, and was formerly chief of staff, op-ed editor and education editor for the Courier Mail. So we've got tons of bylines from all of your projects, Tess, but most importantly, she is the author, in my view, of the recent biography of George Cardinal Pell, which has just come out from Ignatius Press. And that is probably the biggest reason we're happy to welcome you to the show, Tess, because we are very excited
nice cover
to share. It does. No, it's wonderful. And I love that it's red.
Yes,
our dear Cardinal was very red-blooded.
Yes,
yes,
that's right. I remember the press conference on the day, it was, I think, October 2003, where he was made a cardinal, and he gave a press conference in Rome, and he mentioned in that, with quite a straight face, cardinals have got to be prepared to shed their blood for Christ. And people sort of looked at each other, but he didn't say it in any holier-than-thou way. It was just a fact. He was a very dedicated character, even though he was a very with-it, humorous character who got on very well with young people and shared a lot of their interests, particularly sport. But he was a very dedicated character. Yes, I think he'd like those colours that Father Fessio picked out through Ignatius.
Well, Tess, why don't we begin? Maybe some of our listeners who have tuned in, maybe they don't know who Cardinal Pell was. Maybe they know that he was a cardinal from Australia, but if they don't have a real sense of a biography, what's a quick way that you might introduce him to
Father
the
Patrick,
uninitiated?
maybe I think I'd start at the end, because that really is what sets his life apart. He's one of a handful of cardinals in the history of the church who was jailed unfairly, I think, for his beliefs for a whole lot of reasons. But anyway, totally unfairly, in a process that was eventually quashed by the High Court of Australia. That's the equivalent of your Supreme Court. But he spent 404 days in solitary confinement, not allowed to say Mass, cut off from his friends, continual strip searches. It was hard going. And he was, I suppose you'd put it, framed and convicted on child sex abuse offences that, looking back on them, it was totally unbelievable. He could not have done what he was accused of doing, because he was accused of attacking 2 choir boys after Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Melbourne, when the sacristy was full, priests coming and going, servers were putting candles away in the same room, and he was down the back of the cathedral greeting people anyway. However, the whole legal process went through, and he was jailed, and he lost his first appeal, and then it took the High Court of Australia to clear him 7-0. So that, in a nutshell, that's the latter part of his life. Then he went back and lived in Rome a lot. He also spent some time in Australia with friends and family, but he left a huge impact on the church. In his latter years, he wrote a pretty controversial memo that was signed Demos. Other cardinals were involved in this as well, criticising certain aspects of the direction of the current church. He was an outspoken person. Some of your listeners, fathers, may remember him from World Youth Day 2008 in Sydney, where he was a spectacular host of that event.
Yep.
And, oh, look, I'll never forget that opening sermon of his on the banks of Sydney Harbour at Barangaroo, talking about this sermon is dedicated not to the 99 sheep who've managed to get into the fold, but the one who's left out, who's feeling sorry, lonely, isolated, confused. It was a stunning sermon, it really was. That's referred to in the book. Some young people will remember him from there. Others will remember him visiting Rome. He brought a lot of Australian groups to other World Youth Days. He was a very pastorally sensitive and pastorally active cardinal, bishop and priest. And, of course, others in the field will know about his very major work with seminary and Catholic university reform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excuse me, Tess, like when you mentioned that, my first experience of the Cardinal was at World Youth Day. I remember watching him receive the Holy Father and welcome all of the pilgrims to Australia for that great event. And so, as you said, we'll start at the end and kind of roll it backwards to talk about the Cardinal. But I would like to just kind of say, how was the Cardinal and how did he interact, or why was hosting World Youth Day in Australia, why was that so important for him, and how he embraced the world, the church, the Holy Father, and all of these youth to Australia for that?
Well, he was always very much in the forefront of the late Pope John Paul II's church reforms and his efforts at evangelization to bring young people closer to God through pastoral activity. And part of that, of course, as you know, was World Youth Day. So that was very important to him. And yes, he thought Australians had trekked to all corners of the globe for other World Youth Days. We'd been to Rome, we'd been to the Philippines, we'd been to North America.
It's true.
He thought, let the world come down under for a change. And people were only too delighted to do it and to see somewhere different. It meant it was held in July, which was our winter, but the Sydney winter was beautiful. It was sunny and mild, and most of those who came absolutely enjoyed it. And Pope Benedict did some great things when he was in Sydney. He opened a new library at Notre Dame University, which Cardinal Pell was instrumental in setting up in Sydney. It's Australia's first Catholic law school and medical school.
Wow.
Yeah, Benedict really seemed to enjoy his time in Australia. It was a fantastic week.
One of the things, Tess, that I admire most about Cardinal Pell is his sense of the priesthood, and you get this impression from people who were his close friends, his confidants, that he, as you say, he was very pastoral, but meaning he was genuinely a very accessible man. He was very kind, very compassionate, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about how he carried that through as a priest, maybe as a priest before his ordination as a bishop, and certainly before his time as a cardinal. Can you give us a sense of how Cardinal Pell viewed the priesthood and how he lived his life as a priest?
I think he believed priests needed to be hands-on in their ministry. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. He really, when, for instance, after he was ordained in Rome, he went to study history for a doctorate at Oxford, and he was his old professors there at St. Edmund's College, the Jesuit college where he lived, they remembered him as being very pastorally active. He helped out in a lot of parishes with weekend masses. He said the first Catholic mass at Eton College in many years. He was always on the mission, in a sense, long before he became a a curate, which he did after he returned to Australia from Oxford. Then after his time as a curate in a place called, was it Manangatang? Anyway, it was up on the New South Wales Victorian border, way out in the country. He set up the Catholic Teachers College in the Diocese of Ballarat. And he didn't just run it and oversee the courses. He had a weekly mass for the students Monday at lunchtime, and he would preach on different areas relevant to their faith lives. He was always on mission in one way and another. He edited the Ballarat New Catholic newspaper for a while, and the same thing. He used that opportunity. For example, if there was a special edition on Anzac Day, the big war memorial day in Australia, to talk about the rights and wrongs of just wars, of the nature of sacrifice, of the generosity of those who gave their lives, for example, in World War II. He rarely missed a teaching opportunity. He was actually a born teacher. A lot of people thought he would be an academic in his career, but after a little while running that teachers' college, he was appointed to run the seminary in Melbourne, and from there as an auxiliary bishop, and he was on his way.
As you talked about, like how he became on his way in the different positions he held, one of the things that I guess I've always just associated with Cardinal Pell's name is whenever he was chosen to lead something, he was going to reform it and he was going to lead it in a new direction. He was never satisfied with maintenance and just keeping things the way that they were. He was always about giving it new life and reforming it.
He never took the easy option. That's right.
No,
and he was
absolutely.
And it's probably why he was picked up, Father Joseph Anthony, to do various things. For example, when he was an auxiliary bishop at Melbourne, he was chosen to lead Caritas Australia, the gift-giving aid agency for the Catholic Church. And there was plenty of reform needed there because he soon found out that a proportion of the money being given to the Philippines was going to communist organizations. So that required a major overhaul. I know it is unbelievable to think that would happen to our father, but it did. And that he gave that an absolutely huge overhaul. When he was head of the seminary in Melbourne, he put out a memo called A Few Small Changes that was very much like his laconic approach. The few small changes, people outside the seminary mightn't have thought they amounted to very much, but students would attend one morning mass a day. They would have a formal Sunday lunch. There would be evening prayer. And the ruckus that caused was incredible at the time. It was a much
as you're describing these things, that's just a basic seminary.
Yeah,
it's a basic seminary.
Those are the fundamental expectations.
Yeah, the people who funded the place would have been absolutely shocked to find out that those things weren't basic. As he said at the time, in my day in the seminary, we had night prayer and lights out. He said when he got to be the rector, he found it was nights out, and it was not nights out basically. Yeah, so he brought an end to that.
And light prayer, yeah.
Light prayer and light prayer and nights out. Yes, that was not going to satisfy him. But I was quite stunned. It'll give you an idea of what the atmosphere was like at the time. When I interviewed him early on for this project, years ago when he was still in very good health, he said, oh yes, he said, I managed to put on benediction and devotions once. And I said, what, once a month, once a week? He said, once in 3 years. That's how
Oh my
fierce the
gosh.
opposition was at the time. It really was. He had to battle through. And he realized that if you're going to reform the seminary, it has to be done by the diocesan bishop. So when he became Archbishop of Melbourne, seminary reform was the top of his list. So, yeah, that was a
Really?
reform project that was absolutely top of his list. He
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
brought the seminary in from a rather ugly old cement building out in the outer suburbs into an old and disused but very beautiful inner city parish quite close to the cathedral. And he had that chapel overhauled, and that's where the seminary is now. So he's left an incredible legacy of reforms like that. That wasn't the only thing, of course, he had to reform. That the big one came later, of course, in 2014, when Pope Francis appointed him to the Vatican finances. But reform was part of his life from an early age.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, that's very convenient, because that leads to one of my next questions, Tess, which was that I wanted to ask, why was it, do you think, that Pope Francis chose Cardinal Pell to be among his closest collaborators? Because, of course, he was a member of that very special cabinet of cardinals that Pope Francis consulted. And I wondered if you could shed some light on why it was that the Holy Father had chosen Cardinal Pell to work on some of these projects.
Look, I think it showed good judgment on Pope Francis's part, a good sense that he knew, and the matter was discussed very much at the pre-conclave meetings, that he knew major reform was needed, and I think he realized that Cardinal Pell would have the personality and determination to drive it through. He wasn't wrong there, as the old guard soon found out, and they weren't too happy about it, including many of Francis's closest friends. But Francis very much acknowledged the importance of his efforts, even if he didn't always back them or agree with them. It's very hard to understand the dynamics of what was going on there. But yeah, I think it was a very good choice. I think if earlier popes had made better choices about financial management, it would have been, the Vatican might have been in better shape financially.
Having such a strong leader, but Australia being kind of the very edge of the world and the edge of the Catholic world in some respects, Cardinal Pell
Edge of
became
the
this
world,
voice.
Father, are we?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Some would say the
but
center and the world spans out around us. I know what you mean.
Uh, but Cardinal Pell became this voice for Australian Catholics, and just a robust voice in so many ways. How was it when he actually left for Rome and took up the kind of secretariat for the economy and things like that? How was he able to kind of stay connected to the Australian church, and how was the church able to stay connected to him during that process?
Well, the
Because
Australian media was
obviously,
always fascinated by him, and he
okay,
continued to
okay,
gain coverage. And his work in the Vatican was of genuine interest to serious newspapers, including financial newspapers. Also, he didn't hesitate when occasions arose to wade into the public square and offer an opinion or two when he thought it was pertinent to do so. I'll
right,
give you one example. Being Americans, you would be fully aware of the importance of the AUKUS agreement between
yes,
the US and Australia, the Defence Pact, which is really aimed to strengthen the South Pacific against the rise of China. And at one stage early on with that pact, a very senior Vatican cardinal spoke out against it and said, oh, it might encourage warmongering and hostile attitudes. What the Vatican cardinal was saying was reflecting China's line. China loathes AUKUS, as you probably realize. Anyway, Cardinal Pell waded in very quickly and he said that agreement has the full backing of the United States and Australia and both sides of Australian politics. He wasn't having any of it. He didn't miss a beat. Look, he wasn't a rent a quote type of person. When he spoke out, he spoke very thoughtfully, but he picked his issues well, and the interest in him continued, and very much the interest in his successor in Sydney, your confrere, Archbishop
Yes.
Anthony Fisher, and his work continued on in Australia, but he was missed, very, very much missed.
Tess, it's hard to come up with even a litany, frankly, of things that we ought to point to. We began, of course, by talking about the outrageous injustices perpetrated against Cardinal Pell. But what do you think are the most salient points of his legacy? What were and by that, what I really want to look to are, what do you think are his most lasting achievements? What are the things that 100 years from now people are going to look back on and say that was George Pell?
I think 100 years from now, people will look at those 3 prison journals and say this was a model of grace under pressure and suffering. They absolutely display the man's faith, his optimism, his lack of bitterness. I think that will be part of it. It will be noted that he had a major role in modernizing and reforming Vatican finances, which frankly they had to be if the place isn't to go broke. And I gather that that effort is still underway, and that'll be part of it. And I think some of his other writings too. He's produced 3 or 4 books of his sermons. I had the pleasure of editing 2 of them. One is Be Not Afraid, and the other one was Test Everything, Hold Fast to What Is Good. And then I think his writings will be remembered. And I think the whole incident, that how could a bishop in modern Australia be jailed on such blatantly unfair charges and lose an appeal and then have the whole thing overturned by the highest court in the land, 7-0. Before he died, Cardinal Pell believed a proper inquiry was needed into his whole incident, into the whole case against him and what was behind it. Like you probably know, that case started in 2013 when he was still in Australia, and police started something called Operation Tethering. It was a get Pell exercise. Let's have a look at George Pell and see if he's offended against anyone. Now, there were no charges or complaints about him at that stage, but they went after him anyway. It was incredible how that could have all happened. And that's something I think Australia still has to face.
Do you think I'm glad you brought up, of course, the ongoing sense of it, because despite the fact that the Cardinal has passed, and we do have many wonderful, lasting testaments. I have all 3 volumes of the prison journals. I just think they're magnificent. But despite that fact, we still have the unresolved situation of the case. Do you think there's a will for someone to really look into this? Do you think that we will get more light on what actually happened, or will it just be lost to the sands of time?
Oh, look, I hope someone can crack it open. Some of my colleagues on the Australian newspaper have tried very, very hard. Unless there is the sort of court case in Rome or inquiry in Australia that compels witnesses to tell the truth, it's going to be very hard, and the trail is already starting to run cold. But it would be wonderful to know what really happened and why.
When we look at that time, his prison journals are just so so intimate and eye-opening in many ways. But can you give a sense of, like you mentioned, 400 over 400 days in isolation, and how was he able to persevere through that, and just to see such a witness of the perseverance and dependence and trust in the Lord, even being unjustly isolated in that way? Can you, from knowing the Cardinal before his jail time and then even through all of that, can you give a sense of what it was that helped him to persevere through such an injustice?
What he said helped him, Father, was he went back in some ways to the lessons he learnt in his early seminary days of the organized regular day, a time to rise and get up, a time to have breakfast, a time to pray. Then he would go down to the exercise yard and he would enjoy sweeping out the leaves and things just to get some sun and to get outside and to hear the birds sing. He missed all that terribly. He stuck to that, and then he would answer a lot of letters. A lot of prisoners wrote to him, and he detected a real pastoral need among them to answer their letters. So that took up a lot of his day, and he filled in the time very productively. He was never a person to sit round and watch TV all day, though he did get to watch a bit more than he used to, and he certainly enjoyed watching sport matches. But he filled his days in. He said it was the regulation day in the seminary that stood me in good stead.
Wow. Tess, by way of conclusion, because these things are can be very serious, very grave, and very ultimate. That like Cardinal Pell was just a towering figure. He was a larger than life man in every respect. And so when we talk about legacy or even the unsettled cases here, it could just all be overwhelming. How is it that you are going to remember Cardinal Pell? How is it that you, Tess Livingstone, are going to remember him?
I'll remember him as a very kind but very rational person who had an intense interest in important issues, and he used to read the newspaper I worked for, The Australian, cover to cover. It was one of his absolute grievances in jail. He couldn't afford to buy it every day, so he would buy it on the Saturday. I'll remember him as intensely loyal, a great friend, as he was to many people. He kept up his friendships remarkably well. A person whose depth of knowledge and writings were just extraordinary, but who, at the end of the day, always really did strive to do the right thing and lead by example more than admonishing people.
Tess, thank you so much for joining us. We've just scratched the surface here, and I hope that we've introduced Cardinal Pell a little bit more to someone who maybe is unfamiliar with his legacy and nurtured those who love him. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, and I hope people who read the book find something of interest in it.
Friends, we can't encourage you enough. Go out and pick up Tess's marvelous biography of Cardinal Pell. I'm about halfway through it myself, and I'm enjoying it immensely. It's a fabulous read, so it's certainly worth your time. And turning to you, the listener, as we wrap up here, we just want to thank you for all of your support for Godsplaining. If you've enjoyed this episode or any of the work we're doing, please consider becoming a monthly Patreon supporter. Please follow Godsplaining on Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, and all the social media places where you can follow along with our stories. From time to time, you'll see Father Gregory Pine and others doing amusing things there. Like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd be interested to know, do you have a story about Cardinal Pell you'd love to share, or a message of hope for his supporters here in these days? Drop that in the comments on the show. We love hearing things like that and hearing from you. And in the meantime, friends, know that we're praying for you. Please pray for us. God bless.